Sehr verehrten Damen und Herren.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you please take your seats? We should like to get started with today's afternoon's program. And on behalf of my colleagues in the board, Stefan Ederhill und Falschlemer, Josef Schöchel, and on behalf of our Secretary General, Joachim Fritz, and our small team in the Institute of the Regions of Europe, I should like to thank you for this excellent preparation of this year's summit. My welcome goes to all of you, particularly this year. Thanks for having come, thanks for being here, and thanks for showing your interest. In particular, my welcome words go to those having a say in the two panels this afternoon, and in particular also to the two chairpersons, Ms. Gundula Geiginger of Puls 4 Broadcasters and Ms. Raffaela Scheidwerder of the ORF, the Austrian broadcaster, now being located in Brussels. It is a difficult task for the two, I know. After that, then, you will also hear a few words of introduction as to the panelists from the two chair ladies. Our thanks go right now to our interpreters team. Thank you very much from our booth. We will hope that it will be a smooth meeting for all. This 18th Salzburg Europe Summit fortunately has no major restrictions as we had them in the last 2 years. But let me still call upon your attention, upon your responsibility. Please do protect yourselves. Please do use all the disinfectants you will find everywhere. Salzburg Congress again have given us a lot of possibilities here. Thanks also to the team of Salzburg Congress for the excellent organization. This summit takes place in a phase of multiple crises, and I also dare say, as a historian, we haven't had them since the end of the Second World War in Europe. There have always been crises in Europe, but never such a multiple crisis. Many crises at the same time. You certainly know that COVID and its consequences, climate, the horrible war in Ukraine, so on European territory, with all its disastrous consequences, energy, security of supply, inflation, and like 6 years ago, particularly also a migration crisis. The politics in Europe, in the national states and also on the regional and local levels have to come in with their contributions more than ever before. All governments more or less do not really find their way because there are hardly any examples of the past you could be guided by. Such a situation with a multiple crisis has not existed since the end of World War II in Europe. If you allow, ladies and gentlemen, let me take the opportunity to call upon all governments in European member states and all oppositions also in the European countries. Given these multiple crises, please just do call a halt in your attrition day after day, which normally take only place on secondary locations, and please try at least for a certain time, for a certain phase, to be constructive and try and solve the most important problems together. As regards today's crisis, I believe this working together would be so important. And one definitely has to look beyond one's own situation in order to actually work together if we want to overcome these crises. Later then we can come back to the former political debates and discussions, which will never stop, obviously. And a second message, ladies and gentlemen, the regions and municipalities play a major part in solving crises. You just consider the migration crisis or the reconstruction of Ukraine. And that is why we have to do everything in order to strengthen regions and municipalities in Europe. And this is what we do as the Institute of the Regions of Europe and the Cities of Europe. That's what we keep trying the whole year round. That is to give support to municipalities. We all know, ladies and gentlemen, that the major problems I've been mentioning can never be solved without a committed contribution coming from the young. That is why during our 3-day conference, quite on purpose, we have chosen for the beginning a delegation of young people from several countries, among them non-EU member states, in order to ask them how they see their future in Europe, what they think about what is going on currently in Europe. And here I should like to thank in particular Lidia Pereira, a young delegate to the European Parliament. She has come here from Portugal and she will deliver a short keynote, and then also in the discussion she will come in accordingly. It is so important that we listen to the young people, that we have them in the Parliament, that we have them in the European Parliament, that we have them in key positions, and so that they can also come in with their opinions, because eventually whatever is happening now will be about their future. So thank you very much, Lidia, for being here. The second panel, the IRE Forum, which will take place later this afternoon, will deal with the overarching topic Ukraine and Europe, dominating everything, particularly also with the question new enlargement, Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova. It will be a large panel in tune with the importance of this topic, and it will certainly bring a fascinating discussion. The war of Russia against Ukraine, as a matter of fact, started in 2014 already and launched the discussion about a possible accession of Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova and Georgia. And all that now has been updated, so to speak, and finally led to a candidate's status for Ukraine and for Moldova. And we are very happy to have some representatives of the countries here, and we are looking forward very much to what you will have to say. I'm convinced, ladies and gentlemen, that it will be an intriguing afternoon, and it is so important for us that we always keep our dialogue factual and full of respect. This is key to me, because only by a factual dialogue and mutual respect will we find solutions. That much, ladies and gentlemen, to usher in this conference, and in this very spirit, once again, a cordial welcome to all of you. And now I should like to hand over to our charming chair, Lady Gundula Geiginger. Thank you. Thanks indeed, Franz Schausberger. I'm going to speak in English.
From my side, I'm very honored to be here today and to host this first discussion here on stage of this year's Salzburg European Summit. 2022 is the European Year of Youth, and that's why young Europeans enter the stage first to discuss their future. It's a future that is full of opportunities, but also full of many uncertainties. Because just in 2022, when the EU decided to put a special focus and to work on better perspectives for young people, a terrible war started and brought up many new crises which we had not expected 1 year ago. Now, how do young people handle these challenges? What do they expect from the EU and what do they expect from their home countries? That's what we want to discuss within the next hour, and I want to welcome on stage here on the left side Nini Tsiklauri. She's an author and artist and EU activist, was born in Georgia. I want to welcome Klaudia Shullazi. She's an expert in the Ministry of Education and in the Youth Advisory Group of the OSCE and comes from Albania. Nikolina Martinović. She's an associate at the Prime Minister Office in the government of Montenegro. And on the right-hand side, I welcome Dastid Morina. He's a student from Kosovo. I welcome Anastasiia Hatsenko. She's a student and political analyst and the chairwoman of Pan-European Youth of Kiev from the Ukraine. And Franz Schausberger already mentioned Lidia Pereira. She's a member of the European Parliament and the president of the YEPP and comes from Portugal, and she will open this discussion with a keynote. Please, Lidia Pereira, take the stage, go to your desk, and whoop! Hold a second, I'm going to help you. Yes. Darf ich hinten an? Mehr? Ja, okay.
A small accident. I hope it doesn't undermine what I want to tell you today. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank the kind invitation and the opportunity to share some thoughts on this session, and in particular to thank the organizer of this event, Professor Franz Schausberger. Thank you so much for putting the youth at the heart of the discussion today. And I really hope that the privilege of being a keynote speaker does not result of my young age. Well, I want to start by saying a few words in general about the youth. This nature of the youth, of being young, is defined by a race against time and a desire to remain in the present whilst also being hopeful for the future. And in the words of Oscar Wilde, being young means having life revealing her last wonder. I want to acknowledge the Institute of the Regions of Europe for bringing generational concern to the fore of its political agenda on this year of the European Year of Youth. This opportunity, this debate, breaks down stereotypes between generations. To a large extent, this is the essence of the European identity: concern for others, those who came before us and those to whom we will hopefully leave a legacy. Discussing the future of Europe from a generational perspective requires an analysis of our moral values and rational choices. When we talk about moral values, we must answer some key questions. One of them is to ask ourselves if it's fair that a generation has less opportunities, fewer resources, less of a future than the previous one. Second one, is it fair to ask the next generation to lower their dreams, their aspirations, and their ambitions? A third question, is it fair to limit the expectations of a generation so that in the present I can live with the maximum comfort that I can selfishly access? The moral conscience of each one of us will only be useful if it guides us to an evaluation and a judgment. In fact, it raises questions very well connected with the theory of justice and the ignorance veil of the American philosopher John Rawls. I want to believe that this judgment is still possible to deliver justice, assure equality and equity, and above all, assure justice between us and the strangers that will succeed us. This reflection is a matter of intergenerational fairness, which I am sure that you've all have the chance to deal with. This reflection also requires an element of rationality and responsibility. It implies an acceptance of choices and their repercussions, concern for sustainability of our decisions. This means being committed to preserve the things we cherish, the relationships as we know them, and how we want to develop them. This is a question of access to employment and social rights, pensions or fair payment of taxes, healthcare, clean water, healthy food, energy comfort, or mobility. Thus, a tangible debate confronts real options. It embraces the moral dilemmas to which we may be subjected when we reflect on rational choices. Good politics require social relationships that enable us to handle the impact of decisions on people and developing an harmonious communities and societies. We are talking about the very essence of politics, the management and governance of our life in a community. In the recent decades, the world has progressively refined and upgraded the models of government, designing political systems that we classify and know as liberal democracies. Europe today is probably the most successful example of the merits that this political system has been able to provide for successive generations. I am sure it will continue to do so. This is also what we should address when we talk about the future of Europe. However, it is the coherence in the politics of liberal democracies, particularly when we look at social and economic responses that have been challenged by a sense of disbelief and falling of expectations. I believe that the causes for this feeling of loss of confidence in the systems of liberal democracy are heterogeneous, and several factors have contributed to them. But today I would like to share with you the generational frustration that the lack of answers has been fostering. This is indeed a cause we have been experiencing firsthand in the first seat on the front row. Never have younger generations had so many opportunities. Never has a generation been so informed, so qualified as ours. And yet, and despite of this, it has never been so frustrated. Despite the poverty that does exist today, there is practically no hunger in Europe. And almost 40% of young Europeans have been educated to third level. Today's young people travel, and most have not had to face the horrors of the war. They have better living conditions than the previous generations, but they are still
bessere Lebensbedingungen, aber immer noch ist man heute glücklicher und zufriedener, als es die Eltern waren.
Reason for this discouragement and frustration. We are a generation of dreamers, like the past generations, with ambitions, and we are irreverent. But we lack a real right to pursue all this, a right to pursue happiness and the certainty and confidence that we will have a future. The confidence in the future, the belief that we will always have a tomorrow with open doors to pursue what we want, whatever we want. This lack of confidence in the future results then in frustration. If we insist on diminishing or ignoring the debate between generations and the concern for intergenerational fairness, then we are opening up a space and contributing to this frustration. Unlike youth, frustration is not something that runs out over time. If we do not tackle the causes of this emerging frustration and merely hope it will go away, it will grow into a type of populism that threatens the viability of our political systems. Populism flourishes in the absence of answers. This paralysis and the inability to ensure young people have confidence in the future. We need to restore confidence that we will have at least the same opportunities as the previous generations, but also the confidence that we will be able to progress and improve our conditions. Progress that goes hand in hand with knowledge and with the appreciation and belief in individual effort and collective action. A progress that recognizes effort, merit, and solidarity. Today's populism is somewhat paradoxical and hybrid, existing between an extreme right and a radical left. In a vicious circle or cycle with rhetoric that is harmful to society and does not address the problems we face, but merely amplify the space these problems occupy in the public debate and discussion. Populists have the media's attention and are skilled at crafting headlines of our daily news. They are very noisy. but not prioritizing an agenda of intergenerational fairness, which chooses liberal democracy over other populist expressions of social organization, we are contributing to a truly polluted political environment, something that I would like to warn you all about. By not placing the new generations at the heart of the public decision making, we are allowing the different forms of populism to expand. And we allow the institutions, the guardians of coherence in our action, to be questioned. We undermine the social moral condition through the devaluation of the spiritual dimension of communities, and to a greater extent of the new generations in an identity crisis between being and having. We question the concept of family, confusing the respect and inclusion of alternative expressions of family organization, such as the institution that the family represents throughout generations and generations, a primordial organization of identity, support, and intergenerational respect. We have broken down the boundaries between the public domain and the private sphere, namely with digital transformation. We witnessed the recovery of theories of social clash to justify labor dynamics that have been overcome not by a conflict between capital and labor of the Industrial Revolution period, but rather by virtue of an ever-widening gap between access and multiplication of knowledge and innovation and the absence of it. We allow freedom of opinion to be confused with an equalization of all opinions, which undermines science and the scientific method, creating space for ignorance and aggressive hostility to expertise. We seek to compensate the frustration we feel through unsustainable consumption, which compromises the next generations, exploiting more than the planet can actually provide. We have lost the capacity to deal with healthy disagreement and those who hold different views to our own, a society increasingly fragmented with opinions in micro-chambers, in silos even, where those with different views cannot exchange information to work together and solve common challenges. We have lost that it truly means to be tolerant. We are locked in our own bubbles of reasoning. We have lost a certain sense of togetherness, of shared progress, of concern for legacy, for inheritance. We have lost the will to leave more and better to those who will succeed us in a commitment based on a guarantee of well-being founded on solidarity, on the dignity of the human person, and on respect for others. And if we speak about European identity, we must speak about the future of Europe. What do we really want to ensure? What do we really want to preserve? Too often, we question ourselves about what it means to be European. Do we have a European identity? A continent with a history of conflict has certainly forged many overlapping and different and competing identities. However, I believe each of these national identities can be preserved and celebrated within the European way of life. Building a cohesive and healthy European identity has been one of the greatest achievements of the European project over the last 70 years. Maintaining the longest period of continued peace in our continent's history has depended on working together to develop the many things that unite us rather than what divide us. It is the uniqueness of each and every community that creates our common European self. Young Europeans, through programs like Erasmus and other shared cultural phenomena, live the reality of the common European identity through the many aspects that comprise their rich lives. This reflection is important for our debate because it gives the purpose to our action. What do we want for the future? What resources do we need? Which decision makers can we count on? On what moral imperative or rational choice will we take our decisions? Which political system best ensures our collective life? When we lack on causes, we must be able to know what we want and for whom we want it. We must be able to reinvent our action. We must therefore know why we should say no to a war criminal, Putin, and his corrupt, inhumane regime that kills indiscriminately. We must therefore know why we do everything in our power to resist tyranny and autocracy. We must support the incredible efforts of our brave Ukrainian friends facing the effects and consequences of the war and fighting to preserve our European way of life. We must know why we want to protect liberal democracies from other political systems. We should remember that millions of people faced death, war, hunger, cold, disgrace at the hands of Nazism or communism. Both extremes cannot be forgotten, two faces of the same coin, authoritarian or totalitarian regimes. We must know that protecting the planet is a moral imperative for future generations, but it is also a question of the survival of the human species in faces of climate change, the pandemics, hunger, and the lack of water. We must continue to believe and invest in knowledge and scientific progress against obscurantism and ignorance. We must bring more young people into the political arena and debate. And this is actually what we are doing here today. And that's why I want to thank once again dear Franz for this initiative. We have not only to listen to young people, we have to put them in deciding their own future. In the European Year of Youth, we don't have plenty of reasons to celebrate. The future is not bright as today as it seemed in the past. However, that certainty gives us the motivation to take the wheels and move into action. Not only for the young generation, but also for the older one. We are aware that our responsibility is also for them. We have an aging European society, and we must redouble our efforts to tackle the issues faced by our older fellows. As President of the Youth of the European People's Party, the largest youth political organization in Europe, do not expect me to make speeches that only cater to young people. That is not sufficient. And even if was enough for YEP, sufficient is never enough. In YEP, we believe that the future of Europe is built for everyone, but the political space of the younger generations has been occupied by other representatives. And this is what we have to reflect on. This is what we have to be very critical about. This is the most important agenda we can have for liberal democracy in Europe, threatened as it is by war and by radical expressions of populism. We need to have more young voices, formally participating, assuming responsibility in public and political decision-making spaces, and not only being seen or heard in assemblies and discussion forums. We must take action, we must be brave, we must be courageous, ambitious, we must learn from the examples of many brave young generations who came before us. For ourselves, and for those who follow us, for the ones who depend on us, who count on our actions. The European Year of Youth should thus not only be the milestone or a celebration, but a beacon of hope. For Europe not to fail, the new generations must not abandon their dreams, their aspirations, their ambitions, and will to pursue the right values and fight for the right causes, and that's what we need to ensure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lidia Pereira, for your interesting thoughts about the youth in Europe. We'll elaborate on the several crises and challenges you've managed within the discussion. Still, I'd like to start with a more positive approach. I want to start with a very simple question that can also be seen as a sort of introduction of you, and that is also going along with the matter of European identity you've mentioned in your speech. So I'd like to ask, what does Europe mean to you? And I'll start with Nini Tsiklauri. What does Europe mean to you, and how have you experienced being a part of the European community, even not the European Union so far, but the European community in your life so far?
That's a big question. First, thank you for inviting. Well, on the one hand, I was born in Tbilisi in Georgia, and in Georgia we say, when I'm Georgian, therefore I'm also European, and it's also like in Ukraine, Ukrainians feel European too. It's not a question. So we really believe in the European values, and we are ready to die for it, literally. So on the other hand, I experienced like 2 wars with Russia, with my family, and facing like the horrific scenarios there made me an EU activist, let's say it like that. So I had to flee Georgia in the early 90s and also in 2008 with my family, and I lived 7 years in Hungary and 10 years in Germany, and like since 7 years in Austria. And so I also feel like Hungarian and German too. And basically, if somebody asks me how, like, where do you come from, it's really, I mean, I was born in Georgia, but it's for me, it's like I say I'm European. I come from Europe because I assimilated in so many countries, and yeah, so I realized that these values are in danger for a long time ago, and I basically had to fight disinformation that also came from Russia, which was in Germany basically a lot of disinformation in 2008, for example. And since then, I knew that it is important to awaken a kind of European civil society. So this is what I do right now, to mobilize as many people as possible to be visible and show themselves that there are people who are very pro-European, that stand behind the values, and who want maybe to reform Europe too. And if it comes to question of an enlargement or any reform in Europe, you cannot do it without a strong civil society which understands why it is important, and then also when there's the time for it, also goes to the streets and sets a sign.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me in this very important summit. About the question, I'm coming from Albania, and of course that geographically we are in Europe, but politically not. Being European and what it means for us, Europe, in my opinion, is sharing common values, sharing the common sense of democracy, because as we know, nowadays we are facing with political aggression, and of course that countries that need common response towards democracy, this is what I call having a common sense of European values. Of course that youth can be a very good promoters of democracy and peace, and of course that Albanian young people since the fall of communism had a very important goal to be part of the European Union and to support all of the processes that are towards democracy, peace and integration. So for me, this is the most important thing, like feeling European, feeling that we have something similar, and we have the same response towards, as was mentioned before, aggression and policies that can deny democracy or peace.
Ms. Martinović, would you like to continue?
Okay, so now from my side also, hello to everyone. I'm from Montenegro, and as my colleague said, I believe that all Western Balkans actually are part of European. They are family. We are all family of European Union, and I believe that European Union cannot be fulfilled without us. So actually we need each other to be stronger and to cooperate better. My point is that we don't only need to share values, but we need to nourish them and to compensate them, to constantly upgrade our knowledge, and especially when it comes to young people. Here I also want to add that I am privileged to be here, especially because I gained my knowledge in my homeland, in Montenegro, and also in Austria. So it is really good, and it is actually a good and positive example that also young people can be engaged and are engaged in politics and are in a favor of decision making. So I think in order to have unity, we need to feel like European, not only by region, but from our senses, from our deep senses. And I strongly believe that Montenegro, and especially all Balkans, are already feeling like part of European family. Thank you.
To hear some, Mr. Morina.
Thank you very much for having this opportunity. It's a great joy and chance to be here today in this panel. Before I turn to the question, I would first like to turn to Mrs. Hatsenko here and express to her my utterly sincere support for what's going on in Ukraine with the war.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Me personally have experienced it with my family in Kosovo in 1999, so I couldn't remain silent. I had to express the support. Our thoughts and prayers are with you and with all the Ukrainian people. And I hope that you have been able to feel all the international support. And I hope that it has served as a beacon of inspiration to not give up on your rightful fight for freedom. To go back to your question, growing up in Kosovo, you hear it, me even as a kid, before I started to study political sciences, you hear the word European Union in the news so often, but I never really had a clear picture of what it is about until I grew up and started studying political sciences. When I was doing my bachelor, I got way more informed about it, during my bachelor time there, in one of the courses, we were doing research on public opinion attitudes towards European Union, and we were gathering data in Albania and Kosovo, yeah, a lot of the people there support European Union a lot. The percentages that we would get from the data every time would surpass 90%. In support of the European Union values and membership. So if you ask me personally, I also feel European, even though politically Kosovo might not be within this organization yet. And I tell it a lot to European friends of mine here that they should be very happy about this political structure that they have been able to create here, because it has eased their life so much. I always mention the free traveling, for example. Everyone here travels without borders and goes everywhere. Trust me, it's not as easy as it seems, especially for us, for example, that we don't have the visa liberalization. It's quite difficult to travel around. So I think it's very important that the youth cherishes the idea of the European Union, the foundation upon this was built on, and it gets engaged within it, and with that engagement tries to shape it based on their perspectives of their future as well.
Thank you so much. Ms. Hatsenko, as Mr. Morina already said, you're in a very difficult situation right now. You're facing a war, and I think it cannot be compared to the other countries, how it feels being European or not in your position. Still, I'd like to ask you, maybe we start before the war, how have you experienced it, and how do you experience being in Europe and on a way of being a part of the European Union, and how do you experience that?
First of all, I would like to say thank you for this opportunity to be here, to take part in this discussion. I think it's really important to have such discussion with youth. And I want to say thank you to my colleague for the support, for these warm words. It's really important to hear and know that you support Ukraine. And answering your question, I would like to mention that I agree with Nini. Like Georgians, they're ready to die for Europe as well as Ukrainians. We are really ready to die for European values, and unfortunately, Ukrainians are dying for this. About me, I remember pretty well Revolution of Dignity, but unfortunately, I was only 14 years, so I couldn't really participate in it, but it influenced me a lot because now, as you mentioned when you present me, I am a member of Pan-European Union of Ukraine and I'm a head of Pan-European Youth of Kiev. So actually, before war, our main goal was to raise awareness between Ukrainian students about European Union, why it's so important to Ukraine, and why Ukraine actually want to be a member of European Union, not only official candidate. So yeah, and now I'm sitting here in Vienna, in the EU, and yeah, I feel like a part of this European family. It was mentioned when the European Union decided to give us opportunity to become official candidates, that we are part of European Union. So I feel it, and I really feel that it's part of my life as well.
Good to hear so. Lidia Pereira, you've already mentioned many of your thoughts. Maybe still you want to give your insights on how do you experience being European, or what does it make being European for you?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because during the European Parliament elections campaign in 2019, I was often asked about this, like, do you feel Portuguese, do you feel European? Well, I told them, I feel both, because I cannot be one without the other, and being European does never, in any case, undermine or compromise my Portuguese roots, which geographically are also much closer to an alliance with UK. I mean, we have the oldest alliance, and so more transatlantic, if you want. But Europe is part of our identity, because Europe helped to stabilize the political system after the revolution. During 40 years, Portugal had a dictatorship. And it was because we joined the European Union it was possible to stabilize the new democratic regime, which happened 10 years, more or less 10 years after the regime was consolidated by the constitution and the other practicalities after the revolution. So I feel both. But I would like to underline the importance of being sitting on this panel and being the most Western representative, because I think it is relevant to reflect upon the following. For many, many years, and I think Europe or the European Union has already failed with countries who were in the process to accede the European family. For many, many years, there was a bit of reluctancy in welcoming other countries to the European Union, especially after the Eastern enlargement in 2004. And listening to all of my colleagues, panelists, I think it's very clear why it is so important to be part of this union. It's a union, or it's a political space, it's a geographical, it's an economic bloc that provides security, that provides, I can say I was probably a little bit negative in my remarks in the beginning, but in any case, it's still, the European Union is still the best place to live in the world, and hence the reason why all these countries represented by my colleagues, panelists, want to join the European Union. And I think, as I said, I think the EU has already failed. The process for continued enlargement was not very well conducted, and I think we have to say the truth when we know that was not okay. So we can, steer the wheel in a best and guide in a better way. But my final point is in relation to the importance of being together, especially in this phase that we are going to winter, or winter is coming, the famous phrase from the famous series that you all know. But it's very crucial because in the western side of Europe, because geography plays a role. It's much more intense, the importance of Ukraine and the other countries to be members of the EU from an Austrian perspective, if you want, and not so much from a Portuguese perspective. But the reason why I'm saying this is because the winter is approaching, and we are entering in a difficult phase that we have to keep supporting, by all means, our Ukrainian friends. And I know prices are spiking, inflation is on the rise. It's very hard for European households. For Portugal, it's a nightmare, I can tell you. The rise of interest rates, it's really, really problematic. But Europe has to stand together and has to keep supporting Ukraine, because Ukraine is defending our European way of life. So we really have to support them. It's not going to be easy, but at the end of this, I am hopeful that we will have a much stronger and much more united European Union, because this war will come to an end, and Putin will lose the war, because the courage that the Ukrainians have shown so far, it is impossible that the result can be other way. So yeah, I want to encourage and I want to underline, if I may,
of course,
that sometimes when we hear skepticism in the European Parliament, and it happens a lot of times, it's always the nations against the European project. But I want to underline this. Being Portuguese does not take, or being European does not take any bit of being European. They are not in conflict. It goes hand in hand, and we should be proud of being part of this union.
Part of being both. Thank you so much, Lidia Pereira. You've already mentioned a lot about the war, and we talk about that more deeply, but I still like to stick to the entering process or the access process of the candidates to the EU. Because what we've seen now and what you've mentioned is that all of you are eager to be part of the European Union, and that's the aim you are working on. And I'd like to have a look on where you stand in this process and what are the difficulties in this process. And you've already mentioned that after 2004 there was a bit of a break, let's say. Albania... Yeah, yeah. But still there are 3 countries, Albania, Montenegro, or 2 countries that already have an official candidate status. Kosovo is a potential candidate, and now the Ukraine is also was granted a candidate status, whereas Georgia also asked for this candidate status but has been denied so far. So maybe I once more start with you, Ms. Tsiklauri. Do you understand why the EU took the decision not to give Georgia this candidate status it asked for?
Yes, I guess we have a lot of homework to do in the institutional levels in Georgia too. Maybe it will take a lot of time, but we will have it one day, because I'm really hopeful for that. I see young people everywhere in the world being well educated, knowing about what is happening and what we need to get the candidate status. And
so can you explain what kind of homework you think that needs to be done?
Yes, well, I mean, it's a big list of things that we need to improve to adopt European standards in our country. When it comes to rule of law too, and it's a little bit problematic, so the society is a little bit polarized. We have a government since 2012 that is a little bit questioning some very pro-European I don't know how to say, but opinions, and it's a little bit strange for us, like also for minority groups, when they're protesting in some cities in Georgian capitals, that they're fought, and that in the church is somehow also supported by some officials of the Georgian government, so the church is also against these minority groups, and there's some problems when it comes to that, but I guess it's just like a matter of time, and it still needs more progressive heads, let's say it like that.
Like you are.
Well, I have to fight on the European side, but we need like more progressive young people who learned how it is outside of Georgia, like in Europe and America, and then come back in Georgia one day. That's my hope, like my biggest hope in my heart, that one day we can also work on societal projects and in government too, to improve the standards. But it also is a big question how the war will end. Like it's a lot of depending on how the EU, the status of the EU will be too. That's why I'm sitting here and not in Tbilisi. I would love to be in my country and also fight in my country in different parties, but I had to stay in the EU and also like in Austria too. In my opinion, Austria is the center of Europe. It's building bridges between West and East. And so we need a Europe that is strong and that is united. And I had so much fear in 2015 and 16 with the rise of many right-wing politicians too outside in Europe, that this whole project could be damaged and that it's not understood as we all thought. It's not God-given, the values are not God-given, and it's in danger actually. We're in war with Russia. It's not only Ukraine, where Europe is in war, and so many people still do not understand that, and this is very dangerous. So if Europe breaks, we also have no future in Georgia too, and in other countries who strive for the European values. So that's why I try to be here and fight with people of Czech Republic, from Poland, from Hungary, from Austria and Germany, and many other countries, like to build this transnational visibility for Europe. And when we've done it, like when we've made Europe a little bit more stronger, maybe with reforms, as I said earlier, then I could think about going back to Georgia and help a little bit to standardize the politics, the rule of law on the European level.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Hatsenko, the Ukraine has been granted the status of EU candidate now. And you also mentioned this is not enough for you. For you, it's important to be a full member, even though some people or even experts expect that this might take some time. What would you say is the importance of being full member compared to the status of the Ukraine in Europe right now?
Yes, thank you so much for your question. It's a little bit tricky one, because I'm sure it's about its security question. As my colleague from Portugal mentioned, it's very important for us, and I'm sure if Ukraine would be a part of EU, like I mean full membership, what would not happen? Like, so it's...
So you mean it would not even have started?
Yes, yes, would not even start, because if Russia understands that she attacks, like it attacks not only Ukraine, but it attacks all countries within European Union. And yes, so because of it, simply we need this full membership, not only because of it, because as I mentioned, we feel we are Europe. We always say in Ukraine, Ukraine is Europe. So yeah, I'm sure that we need to do some homework, we need to have other reforms, but I'm sure that we are doing well, really. Even actually, we say war started, but war started 8 years ago, in 2014. So full-scale invasion, right word for me. And yeah, during all these 8 years, we tried to implement reforms, and we had reforms in social sphere, in government sphere, energy sphere, and energy sphere. So yeah.
Ms. Pereira, do you think it was a mistake that after 2014, the EU and the Ukraine did not work on Ukraine getting part of the EU more intensely? So could this war have been avoided?
I think the EU and the international community never took Putin's threats seriously. And 2014 is the best example of that. So I think what the European Union, now it's easy to talk about the past, but at the time when we have the information, it's a bit more difficult to make the decisions. But I often refer to this speech from Vladimir Putin at the Munich Security Conference in 2007 or 2008, where he outlined his vision for Europe. And back then, all the most important international leaders were sitting in the front row, and they were listening and they were witnessing a historical moment where Putin was basically making a warning. And since then, and 2014 is the result of our incapacity to deal with Russia. But I honestly think the attitude should have been different. Nevertheless, not because we made a mistake in the past, it doesn't mean that we would be stupid if we make the same mistake twice, right? Mm-hmm. We have to learn from our mistakes. What I think it is very crucial is to acknowledge this. The global challenges are immense. Even today, it was the end of the Communist Party Congress in China, where we can for sure expect a much more assertive China. Meaning, the only way to deal with these global challenges is to make sure that we as a community, as a European community, can deliver. And we can only be stronger if we are all engaged in delivering on those challenges. And so being alone at this time when geopolitics are changing so fast and the international order is readjusting, it's very crucial that the European Union understands once and for all that we need to stick together and we have to deliver on these challenges and threats all together, which also requires a different attitude towards readjusted attitude towards the United States. Mm-hmm. We don't know until when Joe Biden probably is not going to continue as president of the US, so we don't know what to expect from the US administration after Biden. And Europe is in the middle, and we cannot just sit and watch. If we want to be in the front row, we have to, in terms of foreign affairs and external policy, we really have to have a different approach. And I think it is crucial that I know how hard it is, the accession procedures, but we also have to deal with them probably in a different way that we have done until now.
Okay, well, let's focus on the other countries in this process. Ms. Martinović, how do you evaluate this process? Does your country, because you're already in close relation with the EU, you already are receiving this pre-accession assistance, does your country benefit from this process, and where do you see yourself on the way of getting part of the EU?
Thank you for your question. I would say that I'm more than happy that we opened all negotiation chapters. We closed some of them, but we still have a lot of homework to do. When I say homework, I mean that we need to focus more on crime and corruption chapter. That is really difficult for us since we don't have yet stable government. Because there was a lot of changing due this previous months. For example, like 30 years, it was like one ruling party, and after that we changed 2 governments already. And we are about to elect the new one. So I think that we need consistency in order to become and to be better in our way to promote EU values and to be stable on our path. Well, what can I also say? That old political regimes and political actors cannot bring reforms and cannot take us to European Union part. So I think that European Union needs to be more, let's say, to have more solidarity when it comes to countries that wants to join in EU. Yes, there is a high criteria and we are trying to fulfill it, but sometimes we need more support. When it comes to benefits of EU, of course that we have a lot of them, and we, as I said before, we already feel like a part of European Union, but we also have a lot of projects and a lot of funding, especially when it comes to young people. let's say I would say from the most of our experience, we almost all enrolled Erasmus. Erasmus is kind of a really good program that gives us opportunity to learn and to see how to be a part of European Union. So my message would be, as soon as we arrive, as soon as we enter the European Union, then the young people will stay in their homeland. Because now, I would say that now I'm in a good position, but I always want to fight for another young people, which means that I studied here, I worked here, and I came back home, because I want to see the other young people having the same opportunity. Erasmus is a great benefit, and I think that we should nourish it and should promote it as much as possible. Also, one idea is to have European Union students in our countries, in Western Balkans. That's how they will see what is the best way to help us, our system. And that would be also kind of small message from me.
An invitation.
An invitation as well, yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shullazi.
As you already mentioned, Albania now finally got the candidate country status, and as I said, after the fall of communism, we have been trying to fulfill all the criteria that the European Union set towards Western Balkan countries, but especially Albania. As we all mentioned, all of countries that are not part of European Union have some homeworks to do. And all of my master studies have been focused on the role that the European Union had in Albania, especially in those homeworks that have been addressed in every EU report towards Albania, mostly focused on the, as Nikolina mentioned, fight against corruption and organized crime. Of course, that during these years of democracy, we have been faced with fragile institutions and unstable ones, because it was something new for us, and of course that we needed to do a lot of work about our institutions and our political parties. But nowadays I can proudly say that Albania, most of the homeworks, especially for the justice reform, it was, of course, one of the conditions of the European Union, and we have progressed a lot towards this reform, and of course that we have to do more. But I am afraid, because in Europe now we have this kind of Euroscepticism, and of course that I think that the European Union needs to be like more supportive towards countries like Western Balkans, because we are trying to do our best towards accession to the EU. But of course that, in my opinion, European Union need to be like more supportive and to have another how to say, impact towards Western Balkan countries, because as we are seeing, as I said, we have a lot of skeptic parties that are now we are facing all over the Europe, and I'm afraid that these parties can affect, of course, the population of Western Balkan countries. Regarding what we can benefit from Europe, we benefited a lot since now, but of course that one of the issues that I'm currently working on at the Ministry of Education, it's about having facilities towards a recognition of professions and diplomas in European Union countries, and having this kind of facilities, we can work whenever we want in European countries, and of course, as Nikolina said, why not Europeans can come and work in our countries. So we are we have very positive impact for the future, and we hope that in the near years we can be a part of EU with the full rights.
Thank you. Mr. Morina, how do you think about the situation of the Kosovo in this process of entering the EU?
The accession day for Kosovo within EU for me seems very distant, to be honest. We're the only country that still does not have a free visa regime. So for me to talk about the future and accession within EU without even having these at the beginning seems a bit weird. And everybody mentioned the thing with the conditionalities that the EU sets for the countries that aim to enter. And just for the visa liberalization, for example, Kosovo finished them maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And the process has constantly been delayed, mostly by the Council, because the European Parliament actually has been a great supporter. Recently, they just sent a proposal to the Commission asking for them to grant visa liberalization and for the other 5 EU countries to recognize our independence, which I think is very important, because the European Union, I think, should have a coherent foreign policy. So I think our journey to EU might be distant, but I don't think that's mostly just on us. I also think that's because European Union is quite insecure if they want to continue with this enlargement process. In that term, I think I am very happy with what Kosovo has done, because we are a young state, and we have a super modern constitutional framework that has built a very stable democratic political system. We have election almost every 3 or 4 years and everything goes right. Governments change, come and go. The system is quite stable. So I think we've been able to build our state foundations on the correct European values, norms and standards that they have required. So what's, I think, for us to do now is to continue nourish them, make them stronger, and there's a few things, of course, left on our side to do. We have most of the issues that we face are especially in the judicial system. That's where we mostly get the area where we need to progress. When we receive those reports of progress from the European Union, it's something that especially the current government that we have, the current political party that we have right now, promised a lot during their election in Kosovo. It was the judicial system and the fight against corruption and creating a state with a firm rule of law was their #1 priority. So I believe that we are headed in the right way, but I think European Union has to do way more from their side to show serious signals that they are interested. I know that they are interested, but it would be better for us to not leave these kind of gaps in such a unsettled region for others to come in and fill them, like we've noticing now with Russia. So I think the presence of European Union there would be very much needed, and the faster it happens, the better.
Ms. Pereira, now we often heard that the countries ask for more support. Do you think that it's important that the EU gives them more support to speed up the process of entering the EU?
I think it is crucial, but as I said, the way the European Union is operating in terms with the countries, country candidates, also has to change a bit. This is not a secretary process. We cannot just be sitting in our desks and filling in the forms and making sure the checklist is complete. This is a political process, and my criticism towards the European Union is on this. We have to take this as a political choice. It's a political choice that the Union is making in enlarging itself, and hence we cannot just do the basics of the secretariat work. It's much more than that.
Okay, thank you. Now, it was very often already mentioned that something what has changed the whole situation in Europe completely is the fact that Putin started a war this year. And I think I want to go into more detail. The reason why I did not start with this topic is because I don't want Putin to rule everything, not even our discussion, where we want to talk about more topics than just that. But of course, it changed a lot, and we've reached a turning point in history. Not only the security question has changed completely, Europe is as fragile as never in the last 70 years ago. And we also face economic crisis, mainly due to an energy crisis that goes along with the problems with Russia. Now, all in all, it's very hard to stay optimistic these days. But none of us can imagine how hard it's been for those who live in the Ukraine or those who had to leave the Ukraine in this war. So, Ms. Hatsenko, I'd like to ask you once more, what do you expect from the European Union and from the member countries to do in this situation? Are you satisfied with the action that has been taken by the EU? Would you ask for more support? What does the EU need to do now to support the Ukraine?
First of all, I would like to mention that we really appreciate support and help from the European Union because we understand it's crucial for us. But maybe I would not talk about some weapons or something, but I would ask the European Union to be more united about some questions because we see, for example, some countries, I don't know, I know that it's very difficult, for example, to have embargo on gas, but at least try to do it. It would be perfect. Or, for example, when I read news that Hungary is the only one country who decided that it will not take part and not support training mission for Ukraine. So I just really want the European Union to be more united in this case, be more united like towards this crucial challenges that it faces right now. Yeah, and of course, I would like to see maybe more support in this case. So we really appreciate what we receive, and we know that it's not obligatory for you to do it. We appreciate it and we are thankful, but still we fight for European values, as I said, and it's important for us to feel the support.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Tsiklauri, Georgia has also been in war with Russia, and you already mentioned that for this reason, this war that's going on in the Ukraine is quite close to you emotionally. Yep. Can you explain how do you evaluate the measures that have been taken by the EU, and would you expect the EU to act differently now?
Well, I already mentioned Hungary and what is going on there. I can tell you from my experience of my colleagues, for example, who try to demonstrate in Hungary too for European values, and also what's right now happening in Ukraine. And there are more and more young people who of course know what's happening and they want to do something, but it's so hard to go out and show the European flag on the streets in Budapest or in any other town or village in Hungary. It's a taboo, so it's something we have to work on. Instead, Orban will have more and more empowerment, and he is showing another way as his colleagues. So it's also the question of anonymity in the European Council, and how will we handle that in future in basic and key questions about the future and in crises that are coming. And we mentioned that the European Union has to do more, but in my opinion, we tend too much to expect so much of the institutions. In my opinion, it's the people. It has to come bottom up. We have to make pressure on the politicians, especially in the European Council, on our national politicians who have the power and are decision makers of Europe. They are the ones, they are making these important decisions that will change the future of Europe and Ukraine too. So I invite you to be a part of this movement, of civil societal movement too. It is also important to engage in such movements, not only in political parties, which is also important for young people to become a decision maker, but also to be able to network with people who really need you in countries like Hungary. And there are some that really need us. For example, if they are making a pro-European demonstration and for a specific topic, and there are not enough people, they need support and help. So some friends of mine, colleagues from other countries, they travel to Hungary and are making the demonstration together. And it happened 1 week ago in Prague, for example. We did it there with thousands of young people. And if they need us in Poland, we're going to Poland too. But we have to show that there is this European society that is strong and it can network and keep together. So I think this is the key moment for Europe, and you're all invited to be part of it. And
Okay, there. Applause at this stage.
if you look for exact initiatives, for example, Pulse of Europe is one of the biggest, part of it since 2017. It's existing in 180 cities, also in non-EU countries, and we're still growing. We don't have these demonstrations like in 2018 or 19 or 17, but it was also because of Corona. But right now we're rising again, and we're becoming more and more pan-European. So this would be a good way to show your support.
Okay, you're all invited. Good, Mr. Morina. Now, the war in the Ukraine also affected the Kosovo a lot because it increased the tension between Kosovo and Serbia. How do you see this development from the inside? And do you also think that the European Union could help in a way to solve that problem and to lower this tension?
Well, regarding the last question, European Union has been facilitating the dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo ever since it started, and it's a very much needed presence. Together, I think, with United States as well. They should both be part of it. It was very sad to hear the news of the war in Ukraine, especially for us back in Kosovo. As I said before, I also have experienced it, even though I was just 4 years old. During that time, I was very happy with my country's reaction because we were one of the first to express our support for Ukraine. I was immediately noticing in the news this temptation to start and spread this propaganda by comparing the situations of Kosovo with these regions in Ukraine, and by the Serbian media and the Russian one, which do not stand at all. But for one thing that I was not happy, but out of all this situation was that for a lot of years we've been complaining that in a certain way Serbia is flirting with both sides, EU and Russia, and we were trying to point out that they do not really care about the European values, but they only see it as a source where they can exploit it for more resources. And lately with the Russian war, I think that has proved us right, proved our argument, because they are still the only country that have declared some sort of weird neutrality in all this. They refused to put sanctions. And then we also had the tiny little bit of problems in the north of Kosovo. So I think with all this situation, it benefited us very well, because now I think that the world has a clearer view for what Kosovo stands for. They know that now we are unshakable from our ideas and norms to follow the European values, and I was quite happy about it. I think we've done a smart, proactive foreign policy decision, and still, to conclude, very sad about what's going on in Ukraine. I hope that it ends as soon as possible, and I think it's important because the aim of Russia now that they might be losing the war might be to drag it on as long as possible. And we're not going to be, after some time, we're not going to be that much interested into this topic when we see it in the news, and we're going to just want to keep scrolling down and not stop. So I urge everybody to just keep staying interested with what's going in Ukraine. Don't lose focus. Let them know that they have our support, and try to get informed properly and not from fake news or other sorts of propaganda, because Russia is actually quite aggressive with these sorts of hybrids war as well. So yeah, just keep being interested with what's going there. If you don't feel that you can help in any other way, this is the best way to help. Just stay properly informed and keep reading the news of what's going in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Martinović and Ms. Shullazi, your countries are not directly affected by the war. Still, what you also experience is the crisis that are going along with it. As we've already heard, every European country now is affected when it comes to high energy prices, when it comes to high inflation. What is your approach? What do you think needs to be done, and how can we ensure that we solve these problems and solve these crises in solidarity and not lose interest and not maybe change our opinion because we are losing our wealth in the way we experienced it up until now?
Well, I would say that unfortunately Montenegro is divided according to nationality, according to nationalism, and many factors indeed. But one thing that I'm glad and that I'm proud about is that we are united in one way, that we support Ukraine. And all our support goes there, and all our hearts are with them. So that is what keeps me proud and what keeps me happy all the time. I think that all of us, not only just the European Union, but I think that just as an individual, we need to do something. We are always saying that the European Union needs to do something, and that is a fact. But the European Union is formulated by citizens, by individuals, that needs to go and needs to do something and needs to pursue and to be heard out. I think that today is actually the easier way to other countries and to other people to hear your voice, and we should use that opportunity. We don't always need a group. Sometimes it's enough one person, and then we got a movement, as my colleague said. So I think once again we need solidarity and unity in all these hard times. Of course, Montenegro was not only now, but in a previous time also affected by many wars and many misunderstandings, especially when it comes to 90s. It was really like a hard time for us, and we completely understand how Ukraine feels, and we completely support them, as I said. Also, I would like to mention on this occasion that my hometown, old royal capital of Cetinje, organized whole movements for Ukrainian people to support them, and it makes us really proud of that. Not only but talking about Montenegro per se, or just Albania, Kosovo, whatever. I'm talking about people's mentality, that they feel related to Ukrainians, and that is for me much stronger than being related as a country, because you have a country that is fulfilled and united in hearts, despite so many factors that are dividing us. So that would be my message.
Except moral support, of course, as we all said, that all the Ukrainians have our moral support. I'm very proud that Albania supported the Ukrainian refugees that came during this period of the war, especially families with children, by providing them education. I think that this is one of the most important points, because children are this group that had no fault on all of this, and of course that I think that they are the most vulnerable part, because they need to find support about education, except where they are based right now. And of course that we supported all the families that came from Ukraine, also with other facilities like transport or finding good apartments with good prices. And of course for those who want to work, we have been kind of providing them facilities of finding the job. Regarding the Albanians towards this period with high prices of electricity or gas, of course that our government have a package about supporting some specific groups regarding this situation, especially young people with having some scholarships about their studies and having scholarship for those programs who are priorities to us, and of course that we are supporting them with economically and of course giving their support about, as I said, scholarships about their living costs, especially those who are studying in capital city in Tirana.
Okay. Now, Ms. Pereira, you've already mentioned that Portugal, compared to all the other countries sitting on this stage, is geographically quite far from the Ukraine and also not as dependent on oil or gas as, for instance, Austria is or the other countries are. And probably there are also no refugees coming to Portugal as all the other countries here experience it. Still, how do you think what is important for people in Portugal or the western parts of the European Union to keep this solidarity that has been shown in the first weeks and months of the war, to keep them alive, even though we have these negative effects like the loss of wealth, like these rising prices and interest rates that you've mentioned?
Yeah, well, let me just stress out that actually Portugal was one of the first countries that volunteered itself to pick refugees at the border between Poland and Ukraine. We have a long historical relationship with Ukrainian immigrants. We have a very good relationship in general, and we are very welcoming of Ukrainians in Portugal for a long time. My mom, she's an English teacher, and she teaches a lot of Ukrainian kids. But this being said, what is necessary is leadership. And it's leadership from the country representatives, in particular from the government, from the political parties, from the civil society. The show of solidarity at the very beginning of the war was enormous. There were a lot of buses departing from Portugal and going all the way until the border with Ukraine to pick people that were in need and family relatives, because there's a lot of there's a big community of Ukrainian immigrants, so a lot of relatives that were already in Portugal and wanted to host the other relatives that were fleeing the war. So this was ongoing, especially in the first months when the war broke. But yeah, I want to insist its leadership. We see from several mayors of towns in Portugal that are committed with this agenda. So you see, like, it's grassroots. It's not a top-down approach. It's bottom-up. To push the government to keep supporting Ukraine in general, but it's really leadership. And on this front, I would say it's going to be very important and very relevant, the European leadership we will see from now on, especially navigating through the months of winter, which are particularly more sensitive to certain geographies in Europe than in Portugal. Of course, in Portugal we also have we have to warm up our houses and so on, but it's much more problematic for other geographies in Europe. But will be very, very, very important to keep this topic on the top of the political agenda, because if we see that there's a little loss of support in the media. At the beginning of the war, we could see 24/7 reports, news reports from the war. It's no longer the case. It's still on the news every day, but we really need to push this to make sure that we keep supporting Ukraine with all the means we have available, be it with military support, be with the, this moral support of not let this topic die from the political agendas.
Okay. Ganz kurze Bitte an die Regie, meine Uhrzeit ist verschwunden.
I haven't got any timing here anymore, so that we are not too long. Could you please give me the timing back? Thanks indeed.
In your answers, because we're really running late now, but I want to mention two more topics. First topic, the climate crisis. That's something which is in every survey that is undertaken within young people. It ranges on the very top positions. First is war and security since the war started. Second is most time it's climate changes. Maybe I can ask you for just one sentence. In these very hard conditions we're going through, how can your country still contribute to manage this crisis? What do you think needs to be done in your country and also the EU not to lose this big topic out of sight? One quick round starting here, please.
Okay, one sentence will be hard, but we need not only Fridays for Future, but also Europe for Future, because it goes hand in hand, and we cannot solve the climate crisis without European solutions.
I think that the most important thing during this period of times is staying all unit and together and trying to find the best solutions even for our countries, but also for countries like Ukraine that are facing with very big problems. And of course that the European Union and the countries that are candidate and countries that are looking to be candidate countries need to stay together and to work for the future, for the secure future, and of course to find best solutions in the best ways.
I would say that we need to to hear and to feel others, to have empathy for others, and that's probably the best way, the deepest way to stay consistent and brave in decision making and also in affecting the decision making. So that would be.
To be vulnerably honest, the concerns of climate change are not the biggest problems that Kosovo has. So for us, we still, of course, acknowledge them as a crisis, and we would be able to give in our share, because I think we also have a lot of to do in this aspect, because we still our heating system, for example, still operates with coal, which should be substituted as soon as possible. But it currently, for us, I don't think that it's our biggest concern, but we would participate in helping in it with whatever we can.
Yeah, for me, it's an extremely difficult question, because it's very difficult to implement some, I don't know, reforms in terms of climate change, because first of all, now we're very worried about the Pereira power plant, because it can face danger from Russia. And again, Chernobyl power plant faced danger in the very beginning. So yeah, but still, I know that in Ukraine now we have initiative. It's called Greening of the Planet, and it's also about greening of Ukraine, and it's still working. For example, in some liberated from Russian occupation cities, they continue to plant trees. So at least this we have.
I think that's one important thing you mentioned beforehand, that you said even though you are in war, you're still working on many future topics. Yeah. And I think it's important to know that, because I would not have expected there is any thought for things like that, and I think it's important to know that too.
Well, what we saw with the approval of the European climate law, it happened during the peak of the pandemic. So 10 years ago, there was not such support for environment and for climate change. Today, the president says that we really have to change our habits to turn our economic models into a more sustainable approach, circularity, and so on. Europe is, and I think we have to say this, Europe is the only continent in the world that is really doing its utmost to fight climate change, even though we are the least producers of CO2 emissions. So we are doing a lot. We were the first geography in the world to have European a joint climate law. So we have common targets for neutrality by 2050. We have delivered with packages, legislative packages to address this, the so-called Fit for 55. So I think a lot is being done, but of course, and is in the course of even more achievements, even in times of critical situations when we are talking about energy crisis. And this is a warning. If we had done what we could have done in terms of transitioning from fossil fuel energy sources to to renewable energy, we would not be in the situation of so much dependence from the Russian oil or gas. I conclude with this. Recently, it was announced an agreement between the Iberian Peninsula, so Portugal, Spain, and France, which is terrible. It does not go in the direction of fostering renewable energy. It instead opens up the need for gas and hydrogen instead of leveraging on the solar and wind power that the Iberian Peninsula is good at. And France, again, pushing for their nuclear energy.
Okay. Now, I'll give you one last question. I'd like to elaborate that more deeply, but it's not possible due to the time. I want to come back to the fact that this is the year of youth, 2022, and that this was called the year of youth because several studies showed that the COVID crisis hit or affected young people very much, and that's why the EU decided to focus on the needs of young people. And for a final round, I'd ask you to give just one sentence on what you think needs to be done to give young people in Europe more perspectives and to make their future a bit brighter than it seems in times like these. Maybe we'll start here this time.
Well, you're asking somebody who comes from a way more underdeveloped country than most of the countries here in Europe. So when I first came here, for me it was I was seeing the progress all around. So even 2 years after still living here, sometimes I hear people complaining here about the system. I still don't get it because I think it's working fine, way better than with what I was used to. So I think it's just important to not just constantly run behind these ideas of improving, but also you can sometimes cherish what you have built, because I think it's a great project already.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can only agree, because I also think so that we need to cherish it. And for example, if we talk about Ukraine, I see huge improvement after 2014, after Revolution of Dignity, when we choose actually our European path. So.
I think we have to keep moving forward together with hope.
I think that we need to be brave, strong, and to be consistent.
I'm very happy that during the European Year of Youth, Tirana this year is European Youth Capital, and this year more than ever, the youth have been in the main parts of decision making, and I think that this is one of the points that we need to work more, because to conclude it all, youth need to be part of every decision-making body, even in local government, also in central ones. So, as we all mentioned, we need to be more focused on what we want in future.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have to mention, I've been here in 2019 in the same round, but there were 7 men, high officials, and we were talking about same topics, about EU enlargement, and the future of Europe and so on. And when it came to solidarity and candidate status for Ukraine and Georgia and so on, they were like, oh, don't be so naive. Oh, come on. This is too optimistic. But now look at us. It's 2022 and we're full of young women, young people on a stage, and there's another atmosphere and another energy. I don't know if I'm the only one that feels it, but I am very optimistic about the future. And I think if we all think out of the box and engage and be in such panel discussions like this. Thank you for organizing something like this. We need more of this here. Then maybe we can come to a better and stronger society all across Europe. And please engage, please do something. Please do something and contact me if you want to do it. But don't be quiet.
Thank you for these positive last words. Sorry for running late. You have a short break now, and at 3:15, the next panel discussion will start here about the new enlargement. Enjoy your break and enjoy the second discussion this afternoon. Thank you. Bye.